Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing Natural Born Killers. It was released in 1994, directed by Oliver Stone, it stars Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Tom Sizemore, Tommy Lee Jones, Robert Downey Jr., and Rodney Dangerfield. This movie tells the story of a couple murdering and doing some more murdering. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 28-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. So let's talk about Natural Born Killers. What's interesting to me about this film is I had not watched it since my college days. I definitely did not see it when it came out. It probably would have been a hell of a shock to my senses seeing it back in 94. Definitely too young to watch something, I think, this visceral. But it was a movie that I had to watch for a writing class where we had to break it down. And I swear to you, I have to find that paper so we can look at it and either laugh or realize that I may have had something of value to say about it back then. But today is a very different story. It this is. I feel like this is a little bit of a tough watch in terms of it felt. I'm going to use the word. It felt almost juvenile, or maybe I want to say if there was, you're talking with someone and they say, "Do you like art house films?" And then maybe you think of this one because there's just so much going on and it's so over the top with, I think, the visceral imagery. There's just, I think, a lot going on with the idea behind watching two serial murderers kind of go on a rampage. But I think before we go into, the full detail, I've kind of given a hint about how I feel. But Bobby, what do you think when you see what we just watched?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting watch, that's for sure. So I actually don't think I've seen this entire movie before. I think I've seen bits and pieces of it, catching it on TV here and there.
Wait, what TV is airing this? Tell
And
me.
like some like HBO
I
or
was going to say we always
Showtime
fall
or
back on USA, right? Can you imagine the edited version of this film?
right. No,
Made
like
for
it'd be
USA.
totally butchered, no pun intended. But no, I mean, like it is a very interesting watch, and I mean, like you were saying, like it's very like stylized visually, to put it one way, like it's obviously very intentional throughout it. So it's got your main situation, and then it's got a whole bunch of various layers of B-roll. It's got like, okay, like here's the main perspective, and then the other's perspective, and some of it is very like saturated color, and then it's soup, in there is the black and white, the grainier stuff, and then there's the narrative of the movie, and then there's like the, okay, let's like take a different perspective of the same thing that's going on here. Like, okay, like here's the same scene, but instead of them talking, it's like, oh, we're dancing, or we're like melodically playing to the same scene. So it must have been quite a feat of engineering to try to put this thing together.
You mean it almost makes it sound the way you're describing it, like they definitely had fun filming it.
Well, I mean, a director once told me, if you're not having fun making a movie, you're doing it wrong. But
I guess fun is subjective. Let's talk to the fun man, Matt. How much fun did you have watching this?
Why am I the fun man? I to say that I absolutely loved it would be a flat out lie. I did not enjoy this movie from beginning to end. I can't really pick out a single thing that I enjoyed about it, other than the occasional song that I enjoyed in the soundtrack. I have not seen this movie all the way through, edited or unedited. So I went into this, as it was a new experience watching it. I had my preconceptions of what the movie was going to be going into it. But yeah, it lived up to my expectations, I think. to me, this is one of the movies that, like, honestly, I feel like it's more about the message than about the story. It has a very clear, transparent, very shallow message, that's very 90s. This is definitely in the era of the exposure of how violence in reality and in media cross-pollinated each other, right?
I guess, yeah, I think that's a good point. If we take it back, if we take it back to that 1990s mindset, I do have that element of this probably would have blown my mind. But I will tell you, watching it now, I don't know if you felt this way. It was a lot less murdery than I thought it was going to be.
Oh no, and it was not nearly as graphic as I thought it was going to be either, to be honest.
Right.
I went into it, I guess, mistakenly because I knew that Tarantino was involved and that the cinematographer had did like Kill Bill and Inglourious Bastards and stuff. Like, it just felt like I was going into it kind of expecting that, and it really wasn't. Like, there was a few things here and there, but this definitely wasn't torture porn or anything like that. Nothing that like I've come to expect out of like Eli Roth, that we've seen in recent decades or whatever. So it's definitely not at that level for sure.
I guess there was a part where things about it definitely reminded me so much of, I almost feel like Kill Bill. The first Kill Bill, where there was like an element of cartoonish, childish, ness to what we were seeing, sort of the disregard for what would normally be a heavy scene presented in such a like a TV show manner with, Rodney Dangerfield playing the dad character as a creepy domestic violence, raping his children, just very, very not cool stuff, all painted around, like a 1950s
like
TV
I
show
Love Lucy, or
yes, I Love Lucy.
Right. Well, it's the idea, if you are exposed to something horrible, but it's in the trappings of, something that you enjoy, like it's not quite as horrible, right? Like, and it's kind of like the media, like just looking at, like all the stuff that we're exposed to today, and like the 24 hours of TV and all that kind of stuff, just kind of like desensitizing.
Or what we'd call it today, we say people doom scroll. You get on the internet and you just bad news after bad news, and you just keep feeding yourself with it. Yeah, that childishness, I guess, of the action. You mentioned Tarantino, but I think you said you found some information about how he felt about his involvement with this, because it definitely opened with written by, right?
The story
was, and the history of it was, that he had written it with the expectations of wanting to direct it. It ended up getting sold to a third party, and then to Warner Brothers, and then Oliver Stone had heard about it and wanted to get involved with it. And when they got a hold of it, and when you look at the credits, I think Oliver Stone was credited as for the screenplay along with two others. And from what I've heard and read after the fact, completely took the original concept of it. Like, there's like just the idea of a couple going on a murder spree was about the only thing that was still left from Tarantino's version. And they basically just turned it into whatever, to the point where Tarantino just disowned the movie altogether. Like, I'm pretty sure if he could have, he probably would have removed the story by, if he could have. So yeah,
a little post-release edit. Everyone remove that piece, please. Edit it out. We have the technology.
Alan Smithy, or whatever the name is.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the heaviness of it, like you said, the shallow nature of it, it was a bit of beating us over the head with what they were trying to present us with in terms of the consumption of the very thing that you're watching kind of creates this mess, I guess.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because that even happened within the context of the movie. The movie is, what's happening in the movie is telling you like what they're trying to say, which is like the media begets violence, and what he says in the media begets violence. Well, what happened in the movie was that they were watching the interview with the guy, and what he said incited the riot in the prison. And so it was all kind of like circular meta.
Did you care? Did either of you actually care about Mickey or Mallory?
No, and that's one of my biggest problems about this. And I think this actually, I've noticed this trend and I'm sure it's just my own personal opinion about it. Whenever I see a movie where I personally feel like there's not an end goal or a real story to it, like traditional 3-act structure with, the traditional hero's journey or whatever. I find that usually none of the characters are likable.
Mhm.
I actually had this problem with Old Country, right?
Mm.
Or No Country for Old Men.
Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah, another Tommy Lee Jones movie where like I didn't like anyone. So like I didn't like after a while, like I don't really care what happens to them or what they do. And
Yeah, I
as
mean
a-
they did set up the characters in such a way like here are these broken people from either broken homes, or we get the Mickey character backstory and like flashes that come by really quickly in a way that you're like, okay, you're trying to indicate or justify why they are the way they are, but
Mhm.
it doesn't really do anything.
No, it doesn't create any sympathy. And even if you compare, and it's really easy to compare this story to the idea of like Bonnie and Clyde, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Having
I was thinking that. Yeah.
the lover criminals. I don't know how much of a murder spree they went on back in the day or whatever, but all things considered, I'm sure somebody probably died. But the idea of these two in a love story surrounded by violence and criminal activity and whatnot, and there's a quote unquote romanticism attached to that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mhm.
didn't feel that at all. Like the relationship between them felt dirty. Like it didn't feel like a good relationship at all.
Mhm.
Whether it was in the real world or just from a story perspective or whatever. And the world around them, just like you said, like it's almost presented in a completely comical way. The
Mhm.
entire situation, to the extent where like, again, no one in this movie, and maybe it was intentional so that it didn't quite step into the realm of that offensively violent. No one in this movie feels real. Not a single person in this movie feels like a real person.
Mhm.
But thinking back, isn't the idea of this that it was super offensively violent? Again, that's again me
I mean,
walking out of this thinking it wasn't as violent as I thought it was going to
well,
be.
there's a lot of controversy surrounding its release, and then even afterwards. So what ended up happening was that it inspired actual crimes,
Mhm.
which added to its ridiculousness. And that
Life imitates art.
right, and then one person even said, I think it was John Grisham who said that filmmakers should be held accountable for their work. Like if it incites violent behavior, then they should be held accountable for that. And I
Hmm.
think that was like a
But
part
that's
of
so
the trial, the criminal trial. That
that's so tough whenever you have a director who claims that he's holding up a mirror to society.
Right? Yeah.
So
right,
how do you blame them for something that they say is like, Taxi Driver or something like that? It's like, oh, this is just a reflection of the world we live in, So
Mhm.
how, it's like, defense lawyers trying to, get out of, something saying like, oh, they didn't do that. And, you know,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it is interesting given that the movie is so on the nose about saying that, look, this is a problem that the media, but I mean, it's always interesting that, a movie is a form of media saying that, hey, like media is causing this problem, but it's a piece of media telling you that it's causing this problem.
Yeah. I mean, there were so many, again, with all the imagery that was put in, a lot of it just reminded me of the idea behind what was the satanic panic or things with subliminal messages, even though they weren't actually subliminal because we actually got, enough screen time to see all the weird images that came across, or they might as well have, like, what is it, backmask? The music just played it in reverse so
Right.
we could have
Yeah.
heard some weird sounds and pretended like we were getting, subjected to some craziness. But I guess with the idea of it having that effect on someone where they want to take action on it, ooh, this is getting into some very ethical stuff, but do we police something like this? Or I mean, again, now this movie just feels almost tame, which sounds insane to say. But obviously, a very mid 90s parent would probably freak out if their
well,
kids watch this.
but to be honest, like, I could argue that a single scene from RoboCop was more violent than this entire movie was, and that was released way before that. I think that it was just the overall, and again, this is quote unquote the message in the movie was the glorification of said violence, right? That the media was making rock stars out of them, and that people were, and to be honest, like I get that there have been instances, and there still will always be instances of, the Hernandez brothers and stuff like that, or whatever, where they'll have women outside saying like "marry me" or whatever. But I do think that this is just no different than like some other movies that have kind of been parodies of situations where they're like, okay, well, we're going to turn it up to 11 just so that it kind of goes into the level of insanity, so that you can kind of try to disconnect from it. So worst case scenario, they say, well, it's just entertainment. It's not don't think too much about it. Just go for the ride.
I definitely think that's what took away from it, was that 11 marker. Like maybe I needed it in 8 or 9, where I could have bought in a bit more and really felt the weight of it, but it was definitely like being slapped over the head over and over. I think we had some complaints very early on about the use of the Dutch angle.
I don't think they ever stopped. The entire thing was...
Yeah, there was a lot for sure.
Well,
can we get a quick explainer just in case someone doesn't know?
So the Dutch angle is when, so typically movies are filmed on a horizontal plane, but when you tilt the horizontal plane of the camera to 15-30 degrees to make everything look cockeyed and sideways, it's called the Dutch angle, and it's usually used to make the audience feel uncomfortable.
They did it a lot.
Or off kilter, basically.
Well,
yeah, there was a lot.
So even more than the Dutch angle. So Dutch angle was probably the largest offense that was in this movie, like bar none. But I will say that this was definitely during the era of the music video experimentation period, where you were seeing the 9 Inch Nails, Red Hot Chili Peppers. You were seeing these very experimental, music videos being made, and it very much falls in line with that kind of mentality. If nothing else, I'd actually say it was actually tamer than some of the videos that I've seen during that time period. I could easily pull up, a 9 Inch Nails music video and be like, I understand more of the movie than I do what's going on in this music video.
Right.
But you random, filters popping up, the egregious amount of black and white, which to be fair has been done in a few of the other, movies, prior with, JFK and obviously with Kill Bill, they used the same sort of, black and white with the grainy, look to it. It's something that's been used by the cinematographer quite a bit.
Yeah. A lot of it was shot with a wide angle lens, which exaggerates relationship between space and movement.
Well, I mean, I guess am I crazy? I felt almost a bit small and claustrophobic in a lot of scenes, especially with looking at the effects that were used. And there was like parts where I felt like this was just straight out of Three Amigos, because they were doing so much stuff with projectors, and rooms felt really small, because when they'd give you a sense of what's outside of the room, it was just a projector running something. It reminded me of like going into some kind of modern art exhibit, because that seems to be a common thing those art museums have now, where they have a room with a projector up and someone's just playing a video.
Yeah,
I mean, it would be
like you said during the thing. It's a LACMA exhibit, right? It is definitely like it's a LACMA exhibit mixed with something out of Amsterdam and a little bit of acid trip, and you were good.
Just a bit of acid trip. What about I mean, again, with all the crazy scenes, you mentioned the black and white, we had animation thrown in there too.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And even the animation seemed to be exaggerated in a wide angle too.
Actually, some of it actually kind of reminded me of, and I know it came out before this, but Black Cauldron-esque animation. Like it was.
Oh,
it was
the rotoscopy type.
Yeah, it's somewhere between that and what I expect to see on like MTV at the time, right? Like I could
like Aeon Flux.
Yeah, Aeon Flux.
Yeah.
Just the stuff they'd use sometimes for like the commercials or even like the music video awards and stuff like that. It was very reminiscent of that kind of, off-putting style. This was not Disney or anime or anything like that. This is definitely something that was bred from like that weird, like you said, this entire thing feels like Oliver Stone saying like, what can we get away with? Let's just let's just film stuff and do stuff. And about the only thing that probably was mainstream was probably the soundtrack. And that's just because, Trent Reznor was doing it. So, and it might only be because I'm used to it now. I'm used to him doing soundtracks now. So like back in the 90s, it probably would have been mind blowing. Like who did this?
I remember with him doing the soundtrack for Quake, a video game. And that was such a big deal way back when. Speaking of kind of going over the top and taking it to the extreme, this was kind of a star-studded cast.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazingly so. Like this was definitely Oliver Stone's Rolodex, just bringing people up. Like the thing that blows me away, and it's hard to wrap my mind around because this took place when I was not even like 9 or whatever. So like I have a hard time connecting the time periods, but this is Woody Harrelson right after he finished Cheers. Like that character and what he was known for besides the stand-up comedy was not what the Woody Harrelson now that we, associate him with. Like this was like really the first one that kind of put him in that train of, I don't want to call him eccentric acting, but what we see Woody Harrelson as, where he could do something like this. And, some of the other roles he's been, known for, since then, he's always been kind of like on the edge. Right. But Cheers. And then this,
he probably was just like, I need to get away from my Cheers persona.
I suppose so. But yeah, like, the ones that kind of stood out the most obviously were, Woody Harrelson, Tommy Lee Jones, and Robert Downey Jr. to me were probably one of the most stand up or noticeable characters, whether it was good or bad. Believe me, that Tommy Lee Jones, the fact that he filmed this 1 year before Batman Forever, I don't think is a coincidence.
Right.
He was preparing.
I mean, he was obviously like going for the over the top situation here, like there were scenes where he was like flailing his arms about and like, they get real close to him with the wide angle lens and he'd have some crazy facial expression. And Tom Sizemore, I mean, it was interesting with Tom Sizemore, and it was no doubt like the movie trying to say is that the villains aren't the only villains, right? Like, so here's a lawman who's, what does he have, a hooker, and he's raping, and he's super cringy towards, the woman and like giving her problems, and is that trying to say like, okay, like, the killers aren't the only killers, right? It's like it's on both sides of the law here.
It's just cringe everywhere, right?
Yeah, and again, it plays into there's no likable characters in this entire movie, really. As far as like, there's no one that in theory, ethically, you should be able to side with, right? You in theory should not relate to anyone in this movie. In theory. And so, and I still argue, I would like to find the movie and we should watch it if we can actually find it, where Tom Sizemore plays a good guy and he's actually a good guy, not sleazy, not corrupt, like a good guy. I don't even care if he's just a minor. It could be a Burger King commercial from when he's a teenager. I'd be shocked if it existed.
There's probably some, short rom-com type film that he did prior to breaking into everything. So, hey, you're asking for it. We'll find it. Just let us know. We got to watch it. Ooh, I guess this takes us down the path. Let's see where we're at. So, Matt, are you telling people to watch this movie?
No, I don't even know if I could recommend this movie to like college film students, to be honest. Like, I'm trying to wrap my mind around the fact that you had to do a paper on this. And I want to see that paper because I want to see what younger Austin thought about this movie and see how it holds up to today.
I do have to find it.
So that's a resounding, that's a no. Nope.
Bobby, you telling anyone to watch this?
I hate to be so agreeable all the time, but I'm going to have to say no too. I mean, it's just a little bit hard to manage. And I mean, like, I do think that it has good things to say, like, like, okay, like to think about and, maybe have a conversation about how too much media can be a bad thing. And let's maybe try to think about what the media is doing to us and as we're watching a piece of media. But I do think that one thing that's kind of interesting is that they may be a little bit offered a solution, which is that love kills the demon.
Yeah, but it didn't.
Yeah, it didn't at all.
That's because they didn't do it
There's
right.
a spoiler because it definitely didn't kill.
They didn't do it right, but love kills the demon.
So you took away that very positive note that was not actually shown to us. So I do enjoy that. You know, I'm going to be the one that kind of goes off on the edge here because I will say, okay, if you're that college student, maybe you should watch it. So you can do a little bit of time travel. This was a bit of 90s nostalgia. And again, the shock and awe for me that apparently was associated with this movie, watching it now, I'm going, this is so tame in comparison to stuff that we have today. I don't think it's something to be afraid of, but I would say don't go into it with like high expectations of it living up to its notoriety, that it's some kind of infamous film that was almost the boogeyman of the 90s. It's just kind of a thing you could put on, you'd be like, okay, I guess I watched it, which might be the reason to not see it.
A rousing endorsement.
Rousing, absolutely rousing. So, as always, thank you for listening, and remember, nobody can stop fate. Nobody can.